As you heard from the Special Rapporteur, violations of due process and fair trial in Iran are systematic, extensive, and ever increasing. Indeed, the Special Rapporteur's reports over the years have documented this in great detail. What I would like to focus my presentation in the brief time I have is the current state of these violations and important emerging civil rights movement in response to this inside Iran. And finally, recommendations on how the Human Rights Council should move forward in face of such a dire situation in Iran. Violations of due process and fair trials, as it was just noted, indeed extend to all stages of the judicial process. From the moment of detention to conditions of detention, interrogations, torture, false confessions, the way indictments are formulated, lack of proper access to legal counsel, sham and extremely brief trials, absence of any opportunity for defendants to present a defense during the court hearing, unjustified long and harsh prison sentences that are eventually come out of this process, to intentional denial of critical medical care during detention or imprisonment that has led to a number of deaths and serious injuries. Most recently, it's been very troubling to see that activists and human rights defenders have been increasingly detained violently, literally at gunpoint, and sometimes kidnapped by plainclothes agents without producing any court orders. Lengthy solitary confinement after detention and extremely brief court hearings on the order of less than 5 minutes that result in lengthy sentences have also become the norm. So basically, we're witnessing a judicial system in Iran that's demonstrating no respect for its own laws and regulations, let alone any semblance of justice and internationally accepted due process norms and fair trial norms. In particular, we're witnessing a rampant violation of Iran's constitution and the rights guaranteed in it that is having serious reverberations in administration of justice. For the past 5 years, the country has witnessed numerous public protests that have been violently repressed, leading to widespread killings, injuries, and detentions of thousands of peaceful protesters. For example, in November 2019, in a matter of just 3 to 4 days, state security forces massacred hundreds of protesters and bystanders with impunity and never been held accountable or any explanation by the government why it used such a unprecedented, literally historically unprecedented during the past 100 years in Iran to massacre so many peaceful protesters on the streets in such a short time. Now, Article 27 of the Iranian Constitution explicitly recognizes the right of citizens to peacefully and publicly protest, but this has obviously been ignored by the authorities. And as the killings and state violence against these protesters have become the norm, families of the victims have resorted to Article 34 of the Constitution that states that seeking judicial accountability and asking for justice is an unquestionable right of all citizens. However, as the families of victims have sought to file legal complaints, not only the judiciary has ignored their filing and has failed to initiate any investigations, its agents have instead targeted the families for persecution and prosecution. Just as we speak today, a number of family members are either in detention or being prosecuted simply for demanding accountability and justice for the killing of their loved ones. This is basically a situation where the entire judicial system in Iran is obstructing the very basic implementation of the laws of the land that provide and protect rights of citizens. As the prominent Iranian human rights lawyer and IBA member Saeed Dehqan has pointed out in a series of brilliant legal essays, we're facing the collapse of the judicial system in Iran under the current situation. To put it bluntly, the emperor has no clothes. That is to say, implementation of justice, or even any semblance of it, has disappeared from the Iranian judiciary. What I want to focus our attention now, and the special rapporteur touched on it, but it has received little recognition outside of Iran, is the emergence of a potent civil rights movement in response to the collapse of the judicial system. It is collectively known in Farsi as Dadkhahi movement, which is best translated as the movement to seek justice and accountability. Here I mentioned just 4 pillars of this movement that have gained considerable traction inside the country's civil society over the past 2 years. A powerful stream of this movement are the mothers of victims seeking accountability. This group is composed of mothers and family members of those killed over decades, either in prisons, on the streets, or extrajudicially by intelligence agents. Its roots go back to 1980s, but it has gained particular momentum with the mothers of those killed in recent protests joining it and re-energizing it. Instead of leading any investigation into the demands for accountability by these mothers, the judiciary is instead intimidating, detaining, persecuting, and prosecuting them. And as we heard, at present, several family members are either in detention or on trial for demanding accountability. Another component of this emerging civil rights movement are the families of passengers of the civilian airline downed by a Revolutionary Guards missile attack in January 2020 in Tehran, killing all 176 passengers and crew, majority of them Iranian citizens. They have demanded transparent investigations, but instead the judicial system has stymied their efforts at every turn. And instead, it has led an opaque process of putting supposedly 10 low-level operators and military men on trial. The process is so opaque that there are even serious doubts if these 10 people on trial are real. No one can confirm that. But the families have nevertheless organized, launched their own reports, formed a formidable association, and are insisting on their demand for accountability. The third stream of this movement, known as the health advocates, are a group of lawyers and activists who have demanded accountability for state policies during the pandemic, particularly banning life-saving vaccines from abroad that led to tens of thousands of preventable deaths. Again, these advocates, on the eve of filing their judicial complaint, were detained and themselves are on trial. Another example of impunity and lack of accountability. Finally, but last but not least, the fourth notable pillar of this movement are the current and former political prisoners who have attempted to file judicial complaints against authorities for violations of their rights, such as lengthy solitary confinement, torture, and other practices that are explicitly forbidden under Iranian law. Most prominent voice among these activists is the human rights defender Nargis Muhammadi, who has just been sentenced to 6 years for campaigning against solitary confinement, the unlawful practice of solitary confinement. And ironically enough, when they detained her recently, they put her in solitary confinement immediately for a couple of months. So in conclusion, as we face the obstruction of justice by the very institution who should be upholding it, it is important for the international community and the Human Rights Council to recognize this movement for accountability in Iran and to empower and support it. Again, we're at a critical international moment where the rule of law and particularly international human rights system is under great attack from many quarters, and it's important to be proactive and to protect it and show a united front, especially in countries like Iran, where violations are so rampant, impunity is so systematic. And we should note that it has been more than a decade since the Special Rapporteur's mandate was created at the Council. Not only the Iranian government has failed to cooperate with it in any meaningful way, such as allowing the mandate holder to visit the country, but the situation in the meanwhile has deteriorated considerably, particularly in administration of justice. So our recommendation is that the Human Rights Council move forward forcefully in supporting the mandate, renewing it, and strengthening it. And it is time also to move on to establishment of an independent commission of inquiry that would be the next stage the Human Rights Council could be addressing the dire situation of human rights in Iran. Thank you for your attention.